In this chapter, we will speak about a few tips and tricks. We'll be talking about importing CSV, working with indexes, naming nodes, email buttons, some form calculation fields, and working with a bearer token. I'm going to create a new flow, and I'm going to talk about how we can import CSV formatted files into flows by converting it to a JSON so that we can work with it in our flow. I'm going to create a new flow here, which I will call CSV to JSON loop, because we'd like to loop through the elements, through the rows of the file, of course. We need to use a transform data element. Let me rename this to JSON to, no, not JSON, CSV to JSON. And we're going to use the function called CSV to JSON. Now we have to feed it, of course, with data, which I'm going to collect from a webhook so that we can upload the file. So I'm going to create a webhook, which I call my file, and I'm going to change the input type to file. There are other options here, but today it's about importing a file, so file is what I'll click on. And then add this. Oh yeah, we need to give it a description, by the way, it's mandatory. So file to convert. Now I can click on the file and I can select the content of the file. As you can see, there are also other options available like file name and extension, etc. But it's the content that we'd like to convert. Okay, good. Let's give this a try already. So first of all, I'm going to create a CSV formatted file, which I will call import.csv, and I'm going to give it a few header names, name, email, data. Make sure that you do not enter, for example, name, comma, space email, and comma, space data, because that will make the whole thing fail. So adding some records here. It's always a good idea, by the way, to start the CSV with some clean editor, like in this case Nano. I've learned that Excel, for example, may be adding characters and things to the file which are not welcome by this file conversion function. It may fail. It's fine that you create it, for example, in an editor, text editor, and then edit them with Excel, but creating it from brand new from Excel will usually cause troubles. Also, if you create a new CSV file from Excel, then sometimes, depending upon your country settings, it will actually not create a comma separated, but a dot comma separated file. Okay, so I've imported the file here. Now let's look at the result, response, and copy the JSON, because I would like to loop through the elements. To do so, I'm going to add a loop here. And the value that I need to enter here will be coming, of course, from the CSV to JSON, but we need to feed it first with a model. And therefore, I'm pasting here in the data that I've just created and save it. So let's verify if it's still there. Okay, now we can use the transform data. Now we also have to make sure that we are giving the transform data the right model, let's say. But let me first here add a Slack note. I'm going to put something in the Slack, in the flows or general channel, and I'm going to use the data or the name and etc. from the loop. Now, as you can see, we don't have any model yet, so we need to edit the schema. I'm also going to paste in here that same data, but I'm going to take away the brackets, the straight brackets, and make sure that I have only one record with valid data available. And we could leave out the values as well as save this. And now the loop understands what kind of data we can expect. So there's two things that you need to do. On the one hand, you need to feed the transform element with a data structure, the model, which is containing straight brackets and may contain multiple elements, that's fine. And you also have to give the loop itself a model which is without the straight brackets and just one record, of course. Let's run this again. Select the file, import, submit. And look at Slack general, and here now we can see that we have imported the information from the file. A few more things to say about working with CSV files. It's very sensitive. It's always a good idea to add to the end some kind of field that you will not use, but let's call it end, for example, and give it some value. I've noticed sometimes that we are not picking up the last column from the rows. So therefore, it's a good idea to have this. Make sure that you modify, of course, your model. So and make sure, by the way, that you have things like empty spaces and all other strange things in the model. Take them away, clean it up. Otherwise, it may happen that you try to save it and that it will spin forever and never saves. Just verifying here, yeah, okay, that was successful. Now we have to do the same thing with the loop definition, of course. I also need to edit the schema here. I'm going to use the same one. And again, remove the straight brackets, of course. Because we need to feed it with one valid JSON so that it understands what elements it can expect. And save this. Okay, this looks good. Now uploading it. Okay, while we're uploading here, like I said before, a clean CSV is always important. Sometimes it may fail with certain characters or characters which are added by Excel or other tools. So therefore, always a good idea to edit the CSV file itself with a text editor and make sure that you have clean values. Let's talk about calling an API and making sure that we fill in the elements that gets returned in the right way to select them. This is a common mistake. So whenever you have an array, it expects an index. So let me give an example here. I'm going to use a Redrock query, and I'm going to map this to select a certain user. So let's change this to take away the properties and take away the type as well. So make sure that we just have the retro query to select from users where display name is cloud admin. Okay. Let's run this call and see what result we get back. Response, okay, the body, results, that's an array of one element. And that's important that this is an array. And here we see all the results for that cloud admin. So it is important here that this element is an array. I'm going to copy this object here. And now I'm going to chat an element in Slack. So we need to set the authorization. I'm going to post this into the flows channel. And the value that I'm going to post here, or the UID, that's what I would like to post. I'm going to get that from the retro query, so I need to feed it first with the body, edit the schema, take away whatever's in there. So I just copied that body from the query result and save this. And now let's find the UID. Or yeah, take maybe display name. It's fine as well. No, let's take the UID. Okay, so like I was saying, what was returned, let's take a look at this again. The return of that redder query in the response, in the body, results, it is an array. And an array, of course, expects an index. So we have to make sure to specify that index as well, even while here is just returned one element with the UID. So in the value that we've just selected, we have to make sure that we set that index to 0, because arrays start with 0. So always take into account if a result is returned. If it is a body, then it expects an index. If not, it will give you unpredictable examples. So let's run this and let's see what we got in flows in Slack, and here you can see the UID. So it's important to set always for any array the index. So this is also important when you make an API call that contains an array in an array, and especially if you would like to loop through these results. So I've set up here a call, just get users from CyberArk identity. And if I run this and we take a look at the result, then you will find that some results contain an array with other results. So let's take a look at the result here. Go to the response body, result. You see here already you have results and you have columns which are arrays already. And columns contains just an object, so nothing fancy there, but looking at results, it contains entities, which is an array. And entities contains just one element, and it has, for example, type, CD user, and the Cloud Directory user in this example. Okay, let me copy the body here because I will need this to feed into the loop, and I'm going to add a loop condition here. So loop. And now I'm going to feed the previous call, its body, with the right JSON so that we understand what elements will contain arrays that we can select from. So save it. And you can see here columns, results, and the third one is actually results entities. If I click on this, then you will find here it has two indexes, one for the results and one for the entities. And that's of course what we need to take into account. We cannot loop through two different indexes. You need to know which index you would like to loop through. We could, for example, use results and then loop into that loop with another loop and then loop through the index of the other array. But remember here, we only had one returning value in the response. So in the body, results, no, not columns, results. You had entities, which was an array with only one element. And it contains, for example, a type. So we need, if I'd like to get the type out of here, I need to make sure that I set one of these indexes to something fixed. For example, here 0, because there's one element returned anyway. And now I can actually loop through this array. It will loop through the results and it will get me the entities type, the first element. I'm going to use Slack here very quickly to show you how that works, or that it works. So chat, post message, set my authorization to Slack, map my fields. I'm going to post it into the flows channel. And as the text, I'm going to fill in the type, which I will get returned from the loop. Okay, run it. Open my Slack. I'll let it run for a while. Now let's take a look at Slack. Oh, I don't have a flows channel in Slack. It needs to be the general channel, for example. Run it again. And as you can see now, the results are coming in. Let's talk about how you can test for a status of an API call. By default, typically a status or a call of an API, if you do that call, then it will say something like in the response status 200 OK. But maybe you like to test for this information. You can have multiple status codes. 200 OK is one of them, but there are others as well, which are defined in the specifications. For example, you could have a 409, which is a conflict of something. With skim calls, for example, you will have 500 and others as well, which would say like object already exists, or could not update, or the update is done, etc. So in some cases you would like to test for this status code and to see if your call was returning something that you expected. But by default that's not shown. As you can see, the status here, it's not part of the body, it's not part of the header either. So how can we test for this status message? Well, what we need to do actually is we need to add something to our messages, some kind of an hidden object if you like, but it's something that we can expose. So let's go back to our call, and I'm going to use Slack to post that status message. I'm going to post it in the flows channel. I'm going to add here status, and now I'm going to change that query is header to expose also the status message. And how do we do that? You go to the header and you modify the example and you add a keyword at the end, a key pair saying, and you need to make it a valid JSON, so a comma, and you add here status. And just leave it empty and save it. And now you can find here the status parameter exposed in the header. And let's put this into that text field of Slack and run this call or this flow. And now you will see in Slack that it is actually returning the real status of this API call. Let's talk about names. It's always a good idea to give your nodes a name so that the flow will be understandable for other people to read it as well. Suppose that you would export it and import it somewhere else. And as you can see here, these nodes like the data store node and the transform node, they have a meaningful name. This one, however, the branch, the split selection, has no meaningful name. It's still set to the default. So changes to something that would make sense. So in my case, I could be I'm looking for a specific value, and this is if there's more than one result, then throw an error if you like. So make it something that people can understand. Here you can see also a data store update without any meaningful name. So let's change this as well to update status message. And of course, it's a good practice to do that for all of them. Here we have another example, a data store read, which is not doing anything really or not saying anything. So read the status message could be a good option here, etc. I mean, just make sure that you give things meaningful names, that it becomes easier to read whenever you hover over these elements, that it makes more sense. You can see, for example, split decision as well, stop when MFA is valid. So whenever you make it more meaningful, it becomes easier to understand. Okay, one of the questions that I often get is about how can we send an email to someone with an approval and deny button, for example. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a flow that would send an email to someone. And in the mapping section, you have to define who. That could be, of course, dynamically filled in by a parameter, but I'm going to send this to myself, to my email address. And this will be the starting flow. and that starting flow will have a subject, approve or deny please. And eventually we will fill in the HTML content with an HTML file that contains a button, for example. I'm also going to create, well, I'm going to set a name first for this to email start process. And I'm going to save this, and now I'm going to create a second flow. And this flow will be the one that we will call from the button. From the buttons, the approve or deny. I'm calling this email process result. I'm going to make this an API accessible call, and I'm going to use anonymous, but actually let me do this with API key authentication. So then you'll also see how that would work with the use of the query parameter. So that means that we're gonna have to provide this API key into the URL call that we make. Okay, now we have to fill in. Let me copy this first because that will be the link that we need to call. Let me save this as well. And let me now bring up here an example of how to build a flow. So this is just HTML code. I have a button in here, the href, so the reference of course has to point to that URL for that processing, the email processing result, and I'm going to add some query parameters. The first will be the API code or the API key that we need to provide. You need to give that a name, a specific name. So it has to be API key. So API key equals something, and I'm also going to add an extra parameter which I will call action, and I will have in this case the value approve. Okay, I'm going to copy that whole section here because I need to do the same thing or a similar thing for the deny button. So copy and paste that in the HTML code here. But I'm going to change the approve to deny, of course. I also have to give a meaningful name to the buttons. So I'm going to have this button be named approve. That's what will be displayed. And this one will be deny. I'm also going to add a little bit of text that I would like to show in my email. So I'm going to add a divider here. And here I'm going to actually, let me make a paragraph. So here will be some text like please approve or deny the action. I'm going to copy and paste all of this content, this HTML content, into the HTML field of the email that I would like to send. So the HTML content goes in here. Okay. Obviously, you could work with some variables that you include here in the text. I will show you that in a minute, but let me run this flow first. That means that I'm receiving now, normally, if all goes well, an email with HTML content that has a button to approve or deny. Okay, the results that I'd like to process, I'm going to add a split decision here because I like to test if the action was approved or not. I'm going to create a data store here with the name email status, and in this case it will be approved, and in the other case it will be denied. So email status again, denied. Now I've set that I need to set a test condition, of course, and this condition will come from a webhook. And remember that we added a parameter there which was called action. Let me make sure that I've got it correct. So this is the parameter that we will need to get from, that's a query parameter. So action, input type, change that to text. I give it a description because we require to have a description in the webhook. Get the action and leave this to location query and add it. So now I can test for the first value to be that action, and I'm going to see if I can find approved in there. Actually, let me check that with the Okay, well, it's approve in capital letters. So let me copy and paste that here. And I need to make sure that that's the same thing, of course. Approve. And now let's save this. And let's go to the email. So I have received an email here with an approve and deny button. If I click on approve, then I will get a result back saying like API run successfully, status 200. So that means it was capable of calling the endpoint. And now let's take a look at the data. Let's see if you can find the email status. No records found. That's a bit odd. Why is that? Let us check email status. So it should be email status because we sent an approved, but there's no record found. Let's take a look. The call was made because you can see here that the API was called for sure. Let's go to the data store. Action. Error while updating data store with provided name not found. Okay, yeah, I made this a update rather than a create. Let me delete this one. And let me make a create rather than a read. Because if it did not exist yet, I can't update it, of course. So email status and approved. Save this. Now let's click that button again. Let's go back to the email. Click on approve. Now let's see if we can find the email status. And yeah, it's saying approved. So we created the email status now. And now let me do the same thing with the deny button. So I'm going to go back to my email and I'm going to say deny. And look at the data store. The state is okay. So it managed to make the call with the API key. And we could find denied. So in this example, the HTML code for what we are sending by email was kind of fixed. Now, of course, we would like to have this dynamic, maybe some parameters like the action that we like to update. So let me add here in this first a form where I'm going to add some fields. I'm going to add a text area that allows me to fill in the email or to who I would like to send the email, so the email address. I'm also going to, just for the sake of the example, place here a text field, which I will call button 1. So that will become what's displayed on the button. And let me also add another one for the button 2. Okay, and save this. So now I'm going to go to the email, I'm to the mapping. The fixed email address I'm going to replace by the information that I've collected from the form. And I'm going to change here the button text. Let's see the approve here. I'm going to replace that with the button 1 that I've entered in the form and with the button 2 that I've put in the form. Let's save this and run it. Okay, I need to enter an email address. I need to enter the text that will appear on the button, on the first button, and the text that will appear on the second button. And submit. And let me get my email. So here we go. Now we have received the email and the button's value is changed. Obviously, this is now an example with the button, but in fact, what you'd like to do is to make the parameters that you sent in the approval link, for example, dynamic. Let's say you'd like to create something that is saying like, please approve the creation of user John. But that user could be John, could be Mary, could be whatever. So the parameter that you put into the link in the call that you make is something that you like to fill in with something that you've collected or got somewhere from before. And that would work exactly in the same way, of course, when you would just use one of these variables, inflows, to fill in the parameter field. Okay, here I'm going to show you that it's sometimes important to remove key values and pairs if they are not used. I'm going to do just a retro query here, the default query that you have available in the collection. So I'm going to set my authorization to my tenant, make sure my path is correct, and I'm going to fill in here, select star from users. So there are a few things like the type, for example, which I leave empty. If I run this flow, you will see that it will fail. And actually, in this case, it will even tell you that there are some unused parameters. But that's not always the case. Sometimes APIs don't tell you, they just fail. So here you can see, for example, empty query string is a message. So I'm going to change the body here, and I'm going to remove all the things that I don't need. So just keeping the script. So let me modify the JSON, taking out all the stuff that I don't need, and just make sure I have a script here, select star from users, and make it a valid JSON, of course. So take away the type, etc. And the extra curly brackets. Let's run this one. And now you will find that the query has run successfully and is returning me the results that I expected. So it is important, keys that you do not use, it's always a good idea to remove them. Okay, let me show you here how you can work with a bearer. So sometimes it's required to have a bearer token to make an API call. And in this example, I'm going to use CyberArk identity because I would like to add a folder to someone's interface. And that means that you have to run it in the context of that user, and therefore you need to have a bearer token for that user. So I'm going to start here with the start user authentication. That's the first step you need to do. There's two steps typically involved. One of them is querying for specific users what kind of mechanisms he has available, and then advance the authentication with, for example, a password or an MFA or something that you need to do. So here I'm going to change the body parameters. I'm going to take out a number of things that I don't require. And remember the lesson where I spoke about take away all the JSON key pairs that you do not use. So I need the user and I need the version. I'm going to be service account. That's an account that I've created just for test purposes. And I need to set it to version 1.0. That's required for running this query. If I run this, then you will see it will return the mechanisms and the session ID that this user has available. And that's something that we need to advance the authentication. So I'm going to take a look at the result first. Response body, result. And you can see here already the session ID. And there with challenges, I've set it up in such a way that he only has a password, user password mechanism. That's definable, of course, by policies in CyberArk identity. And you find there, this is an array. And what we need is at the end, the password to be filled in. I'm going to copy the body so that I can feed it to the result of the call. Next step will be advanced authentication. You see attempt to advance the authentication. Of course, I have to set it to the correct tenant, hostname. All of that is okay. I'm going to map this now. In the action, I'm going to use answer. And I'm going to provide here the password for that specific mechanism. Now, the persistent login we don't need. Again, take away what you do not need. The mechanism ID is something that we got from the previous call. So I'm going to modify the example here, that we have the correct values available. Okay, now we're going to locate the mechanism ID and the session ID. Here we have the session ID. Let's fill that in already. Now the mechanism ID. There we go. Now this is an index. We're only returning one element, but nevertheless it's an index and an index, so we have to set the indexes. If not, this will fail. Okay, let's run it and see if we get a bearer token. Completed running. Advance success. The response body result, and here we can see an authentication token that we have received. Now let's use that token. I'm going to set a folder, and I've got a call for this folders, add a folder for the user. So save folder. This requires, of course, some things to be filled in. That's correct. The save folder is correct. Should be a post, I believe. Let me check. Yeah, it needs to be a post. And in the mapping, I need to provide some parameters. And I'm going to copy and paste those in from a previous call that I've done. Here you go, save it. Test folder, test descriptions. And now we also need to add a header parameter with the name authorization. And here we're going to use that bearer token, but we have to add bearer in front of it. Bearer space. And now the result, I'm going to copy the body first because we need to have the model, of course. So here, the advanced, take all of this out, paste the JSON example in there, and now let's find the auth. Here we go, the auth key. Okay. Now run this call should result into the creation of a folder in the context of that user for who we authenticated. Let's see if it was successful. Save folders, response, state is okay, but that's not necessary. It's just saying success true. So let's take a look at the interface. And yeah, we can see here the folder name was created for that specific user, that service account that I've used to authenticate against.